quality to the Dharma that is peace I bow. Having freed themselves, showing the path of freedom too well established in the trainings. The holy field endowed with good qualities to the Sangha I bow. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions, perform only perfect virtuous actions. Subdue your mind completely, this is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a mirage, a flame, a lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew, a bubble. A dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud, see conditioned things as such. Through this merit may sentient beings attain the state of all seeing, subdue the four faults, and be delivered from the ocean of cyclic existence perturbed by the waves of aging, sickness, and death. This ground anointed with perfume, flowers strewn Mount Meru, foreland, sun and moon. Imagined as a Buddha led and offered to you. May all beings enjoy this pure land. Venerable holy gurus, in the space of your truth body, from billowing clouds of your wisdom and love, let fall the rain of the profound and the Dharma, in whatever form is suitable for subduing sentient beings. Idam gururam namandalakam niryataya. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create, by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create, by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create, by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings.
다 딕송겐.
오야야. 오야 다대야. 제세 친구 시월에 송래. 준주련에 요라. 대대 개원념 중일을 따서. 대대 개원념 중일을 따. 대부의 도ችን 신도 메세바. 대내 속외 전주 셈멤버 계신 관계 시기는 버리우르스. 시성과 따르스라. 대대 개와서 딸이야 셰사소와 그지. 알아주 개와 주게디 천천가 멤버 나보 전에 대바 나군할 때가 나시 망쳐야지 나부티괴래도 싸우려야 살죠. 되네 로교나 계지지 그런가 되게게 내주근지 된가 세보 전에 멤버 매배 개를 교화당 나와대 계지지 좀 유점 내가 세워 통그래서 어디서다 말아줄래야 되거든 남주네 대중만 쳐도 되고 사야다 개와 주베 삼로테 원지 산제 남지 전라부터 투시는 것들네 개와 자오 삼사 개와 잔대지 꾸노다 개와 줘야돼 배용용지 마도 요 말해서라 자 대대 개와 대답으세 개와 냠총라세 대대 개와 대답부 개와 냠총세 대대 개와 냠총이라다 대버 덮침보 신도 메세바 대버 덮침보 네버 첨보 남미진 대부 신도 소규 매버 용하게 대응하면서 개와 찍마르와 대버 사야돼 개와네 개와 통마면만 단대보다 고 망쳐 대버고 나기 꼼서라 대 개와들고 배저를 지는 마도 칭아 배주 제고 들이대로 대대 대버 마무 쉬지 말아 개 첩침보 Never Chimbo, no making devil Misseba Yon Koya, Tinder Mambusa or the Songora. The boat of the Shindu Messebas. Then it's over 30 part tired on chick. No mean devil Kanga Yomogo is tired. And it's a care some of the use a matter of the 2 par rings it down to ya. Nigger some of the par Yoru tires to duty. Generation a co. Not sa Tara to the par tired. Tanda anybody saya tuju nyuru ta, kewa saya tuju de maru taich, tapshirin bea kure sungura. Tete kewa nyamche nyila ta tiba tuju. Tene tsokwe chanchu simme bas. Ta tiba paan jomba chea ta kewa satu saya te, tsokwe chanchu ki simle shenbe, ne kewa shenla tete bintiba yoma resi, tele lakba chi yoma resi sungura. Tene tsokwe chanchu simme ba, kishen kanga sigi nambar yusi. Tikpa siki nanchi da, tikpa ngarsa ki tikpa taya da, suna mambu saya ki tab chokda kiwa da chanchu ki simla shenpe, kiwa shen te tabu yo ma res, te indi chanchu ki sim gomba la beba sheku res sungutwa, oya.
So here, as the master Shantideva has stated in his guide to the Bodhisattva's way of life, so like the example that we gave last time, here the verse says, virtue thus is weak, and always evil is of great and overwhelming strength. So like that example of a dark night that is sort of black and covered over with clouds, that is illuminated just for a flash, with a flash of lightning. When we have that flash of lightning, everything is for a moment illuminated. Like that example, our virtues are perpetually ever so feeble or so weak. Most of the time we are engaged in non-virtuous actions. To even have the thought like, oh, I should do something virtuous, due to the blessings, the power and inspiration of the Buddhas of the past, is something that is quite rare. And so really we have created the non-virtues, the ripening results of which are basically inexhaustible. And we have done non-virtue basically not just in this life, but in many previous lives. We don't have to think about it. We don't have to make an effort in the way that we do toward virtue. So when it comes to then trying to purify those negativities that we have accumulated in the past, what has the power to be able to overcome them or to be able to deal with those kinds of negativities? It says, except for perfect bodhicitta, what other virtue is there that can lay it low? So in order to purify those negativities that we have accumulated in the past, to not have to experience the ripening results that we have not just in this life accumulated, but in countless previous lives, and to increase the strength of our virtue, this attitude of bodhicitta has the power both to destroy those negativities, to reduce their strength, and to increase the force of our virtue. So if we are looking to be able to do so, to be able to overcome such great negativities, to purify the ripening results of those non-virtues that we have done, and to really be able to create the supreme kind of virtue, we should make an effort at generating bodhicitta. Only this kind of attitude or mind has the power to do so.
Oya. Oh, te indi te kar soda. Oh, ngada zo chanchu ki sim de tikba taya da, kewa tsab lap chimbo saya ki, juli doya kare sina ngada tikba saya mangcha de simjen la, chawa cheba la tena, simjen da rondi chibe ko tikba ta sawi wara, mangcha de. Oh, te sonja ko simjen liya, chawa cheba da, oh, simjen da rawa chibe nega su tikba mangcha de, tine sawi wara. Te indi ta tanda simjen liya, penpe samlu kache shuk chimbo yoba te samji, ane tikba taya ta, kewa lap chimbo saya de, ane karso de, lap chiru, neba chiru rubi wara. O te indi kazo, chamba da chawa se, chanju simje bala tambu chamba da chawa to kudwa, simje tamje tungwe de trendu ji chawa da, dewa da trendu ji, ni chambe simde kudwa, chamba da chawa nyibdi ke chimbo chagudwa. O, tungwe da trendu ji simbol di shuk chimbo yudu, nga rangi tungwe, kondulu tungwe, rangi mwene tungwe treba to pa, taadruya ta tinde tichi warto, na mi chin treba nyomu gwa chagwara. Dewa da trendu yudu zang ane chi tikba mambu chi, 다야다 겨울럽 첨부시야 사주요라 걔들 남주네 간주 단단 간주 chanju 심점만 많이 밖에 매나야 심장을 파다다라오데 동해다 되나 섬서 랑경에 처음에 제사 동해기 주 심제 술에 랑경에 봐 동해에 주 메제 섬사 줄을 배그면 섬사 또와 겨울 랑경에 지 겨울의 팬토고도 가지 지기나 대치기인 섬사듯이 삼루 뛰고고도 하여튼 고쪽으로 뒤인도 가서라 뒤만족해 전부 제고도 남윤의 선배다 도디 집에 내가 쓸때 도와 더바 내바 메다 깨지셔야다 된대급이야 정말 개와들 내버치고도 뒤도산 뒤버서 요래 개와산에 뒤도사야 고급요라 어디인데 뒤게 전부에 뭐도 좀 창문에 시에도 와가지고 심지어야 따디사 나라도 땅에 땀할래 랍사래서 나라도 삼에 심지어도 가야라 꼭 개침부 말해서 나라도를 누가 된대요 나라도 집안을 세지래 고저께 말해 삼겨라 텔레야 산제 전주 섬부터도 짜침부에서 텔레야 대바도 지어도 숙체를 지으라 디레들의 짜체를 봐 연대에 전에 말해서 거라 연대에 전에 산지의 전주 섬부터도 삼비 미쳐버려 대적을 롭던 나는 나라도 뒤까지 죽여래 제 또 디테일해져라 디 고치려라 딜라고 지게 산지의 전주 섬부터 그 가서다 제발 표토고 또 되다 남자 매워다 되게 말하기나 말한지야 선음 사이에다 뒤치기로 마도 저들 산지의 최대 현대적 최초 딜레 커미야다체 덤바송에다 겹주변 도토송에다 뒤쳐지 개침부송에 뒤라 나 최대 개침부송에들 심지어리아도 뒤치디 뒤도자 최대 레고도 와 개치슈데 뒤등아도 심지어리아 소사의 신들의 산재의 심정이를写了 이나 산재의 개셔와 지송아주 심정의 개춘조직도 세 뒤지기요 말해서 뒤지에도 가려운 거였으나 심정 거란도 코르데로 코란도 코란도 동안이 안 가줄래 누가 요래 단다 요래 찍바찍바를 지렸삼 그 말해서 제일 때는 가줄래 소설 팬도 요야 돼 콘솔에 잠바다 자와 고메다 동에자도 고메데 소소리야 게 올랍침부 사이트 내서고도 어디전에 섬을 땅고래서 연대에 전에 냐버려서 요 말해서 소소리야 게 되버다야다 겨와트에 랍치아데 산지의 송반나시 티치에데 티치 송고라 어디게 심부래 섬네 그 섬을 들려고도 어야 티치나 망도나
So here it says that this attitude of bodhicitta has the power to overcome our great negativities and to increase our virtues. It is really the supreme way to increase our virtues. And why is it that such an attitude has such power? Well, it's because most of our negativities are done in relation to sentient beings. We harm them, we are violent against them, we create suffering for them. And so, therefore, bodhicitta, this attitude that really is based upon, in order for us to generate bodhicitta, we have to first develop this attitude of love, wishing for sentient beings to have happiness, the highest happiness, and a kind of attitude of compassion, of wishing for them to be free from suffering. And so, because it is through our negativity, our non-virtue, that we have created the causes of suffering for other sentient beings, by meditating on the opposite of that, by wishing for them to have happiness, by wishing for them to be free from suffering, we create a very powerful kind of virtue. And so, on a regular basis, even if we haven't yet developed uncontrived bodhicitta, but to look at sentient beings with this kind of attitude, may that being have happiness, may this being be free of suffering, this is really important. I mean, the way that we regularly look at sentient beings, we interact with them when we're going, when we're walking, when we're talking with them, and so forth, this is really the chance that we have to practice the Dharma. We often have this thought of like, oh yeah, other sentient beings, like they're not important, they're sort of lower than me or maybe equal to me, but Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, those beings are really important. And so we have this sense of Buddhas as being high and important, and when it comes to the kind of qualities that they have, yes, Buddhas are superior to sentient beings. But if we have this sort of attitude wherein we make offerings to Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, and at the same time don't regard sentient beings with a kind of attitude of wanting them to have happiness and be free from suffering, this is really a misunderstanding. Buddhas and sentient beings are not equal in terms of their qualities. Of course, a Buddha has perfected such qualities, and in doing so is able to act as a source of refuge for us. But that refuge comes in terms of teaching the Dharma. And so the Dharma, the protection that we receive from the Dharma, is the kind of practice that we take out every day, right? So when it comes to, as later said in the Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, that Buddhas and sentient beings are equal in terms of being a field to create merit. We shouldn't hold sentient beings as being low and unimportant while holding Buddhas and Bodhisattvas to be up high, but rather thinking for our own benefit. It is in relation to other sentient beings that we accumulate a great deal of virtue by benefiting them, by developing an attitude of love and compassion. And really, this attitude of bodhicitta has that great power to purify our negativities and to increase our virtue. And so therefore, even out of our own self-interest, we should regard sentient beings with a kind of importance, recognizing that it is independence upon them that we create this great store of merit, and we are able to purify even our most grave negativities.
Oh yeah, what in the casoda. On a radio to change the chair, some rata, chayora. And then some tandis and course, some jay chambada, Savada, Tabji chatters or some Yaboda Guiora. Tita Savachuna, Tombani, Corality Machuna, Tis some tangiore. Tis some tan any chisona, do this simply Juada, Juadi Lepu, Sarah. Tangazo Tiranja Shagra, Chisona, do the Namjina, you can't chesa, can't trado, chesa, trado, and dress him, chesa, and dress it. Tara Shani, I kept church, Sanje, there was a Taina Yakuda Rede. Sanje Sungudua. Simjela Chawache, Samutanda, the Tagashan, and Ali, I kept shares the Tavachi, Karchan Chigo, Sungudua, Titemberwa. Sanje, Simje Tamje, the Kawat and Rich and the Tindres and the Tanda Tindresha, the Tanga Tindresa, teacher and the Chess we ranch on the Tavando Yara. Mado social chi, Yoyara, which is Tindres and the Tavando de Matira, Tavakona in the Mexican country. A tea indico. Simjela Chawachi, those and Ali at Tavachi. Karjan Chigina Sungdoa, or Timonere. Changazo, some Joga Dogmadoa, Naranzo Siguda, Rangichumbe. Tipigachizon and do something and Shikora Shagdoa. Tilly Kujuta in some Sanko Jayoma, Tiranja said to any talk what you K, you deke and do some such shit, and K, Yaman, I should issue some Tagadegiora. The Chizon and do some Lutan, this take home Jay Karin, the Samutan, Chizon and do the Tile chicken, any Yarsin Otang in December. Nimatin Desu Tat and the Kachi Yar Chinsha Samsa, social teacher. Some go Jujutan Yardo Yara. Or Tinde Mayor, that's all Narazu. Some time that the Chizo the Fan to do Simjan Tata, Namjuiti, Yajetan Kuet Mana. Ningaman Hesitasha, some Teora, and that church and a Kachavan drive with the talk with him with the something. What did you
So here we have the thought of Dharma. I mean, maybe we try to develop an understanding of love and compassion. Maybe even we get to a little bit of understanding of emptiness. But none of this is going to be beneficial unless we really change our attitude, our mind, in terms of how we relate to others. If it is the case that we say, oh, yes, I'm studying the Dharma, but when we go and interact with others, we just remain as we are, acting toward them with contempt and acting toward them without kindness and so forth. And then we turn around and wonder, well, why aren't my qualities improving? Why am I not gaining realizations? Really, this is a total misunderstanding. So the Buddha has said, if you go around harming sentient beings, but then turn to me and say, oh, I go for refuge or pretend to have faith, what is that going to do? You can't really have faith in the Dharma and go and continue to harm sentient beings. beings. So if we lack this understanding of the whole point being to change our mind, we need to recognize that we're not going to benefit from the Dharma. What we think about, what we so meditate on our cushion, we need to carry out into the world in terms of how we interact with others. And so it is by changing our mind, by changing the way that we look at other sentient beings, that we will be carrying the Dharma into the world. But if instead of that, we just remain as we are and then turn to the Buddha saying, oh yeah, I go for refuge, we can't expect to benefit from that.
Oh yeah. Oh, the 가서래 심제 탐제해야 되고 단도 소수 다는 게 남윤에시와 담보 소수 남민에 잠바다 자와다 지타니서 소수 조리치서 공부이나 소수 냠도 땡게 텐데도 냠도 대졸에 삼로 당고도 잠바다 저 타니서네 삼다 애니 심제 통제 삼마라는 남윤에 저와여서 삼마 통제 삼마 텐데콤 텐데 콤셔도 애니 바로 칠 심제 개발매버려 차여서 심제 탐제시 텐데도라 마당아도 때 남주 삼루탄사도 남주의 직벌직자를 그렇게요 말에 또스마디나 콘도가 제타도 가가요 그래 근데 심제 탐제 대화다 심제 탐제 그 대화단데 심제 가와요나 가서 물리 신다다 라다 저지 매게질이여서 삼루직자도도 탐제에서도 소소요선에 제제 고쪽으라 뒤쪽에는 바로 제 심제 탐제해야 돼 심제 가리이나 대화들 동에 면도 심제 임바 짬지 개화매도 요네는 심제 탐제를 미스야 되죠구라. 마도지 심제 탐제를 미스도 심제 현다지요 전들 따가서 메니 게티면도 대화 유베시제 베 심제 컨데지란데 텔 토고 이나야 베 직버지 장되지. 단단한 저소소 년대다 롱버 직버 출루 직버 메리 직버지 텐데라. 텐데지 메게 차들 내가 가디 이나고 대화들 동에 면도 임바 짬지 교생을 때니 안도나 이 탐제를 명버셔야 돼요. 그거라. 마도 심지어 강강 오시고 말아. 장봉 오시는 장만 동일에 상계수는 장만 저도 같은데 그래요 말아. 소소단 저와 중요해 돼. 심지어 이마이 리그다 미리다 줄로 텐데 개와매게 차고요라. 뒤치로. 뒤내시 때 단단하죠. 그나 심지어 자주 심지어 공대 마시 텐데세 쪼오시 공부도 신대 파다 마다 니데 티다 첨부치데 티나시 심제 신다 참마 제버스 공구요라 데데 찍버레스 기치페는 엄마셔마도 겨왕가만어스 때 파마체네 티나시 제요레서 단단한 조때 개첨버리마도 신다다가데 삼나 텐데나시 삼금에 삼토금도 파마체요데 겨왕가마가 파마체게디 어제레데 tinda samlo koto yo mara ne samlo koku yo rate tapena ngazu dene minetro kewa chima mideji kewa yida kewa chima ge ama phama da karena tila pe tichirma kewa di madu rang titi bachi mijil ke da yo na kawa ke de kage na yo maro tanda chendi na shin mindu wa kesa tinde ko tanda khadu de yebate 무슨 통대에 꼭 계셔버리 통마도 땅마도 뒤에 통마도 단단가지고 체리 파마시부 통거래 개와 표현서는 제말 함이를 지켜서는 양체대 파마도 미래께 대는 가르치는 게 아이고 요 말에 나왔지요 말아 제만데 패스하지 못이 계셔버리시고도 어디 인데 거던데 삼을단데 가가 지시표는 거 마시면 마도 소소 소화도 매마도 전달은 오늘 집에 가가 그진 집에 집에 아삼사도 tinda samlo koku yodo oti indi ta kangdar namjune chichonal tetune laga chitune so simjege shembe samlo da shala chawa pamba lotia kyakene teya yake kombeto tande ane takbe shenche be chanju sem sete so kekwere sha samja tinga so a koku do oti sonza simje tamjege ta tup tupgege yiri meba jawa kyakuse yende kunde je kansashi 단대네 두기 세월다 네 삼로 텐데 땅으로 마도 남바게 따와데 가셔야 텐데 세요라 다시 지담에 하 삼겨라 지만 상계선은 시부 지긴 시거래서 상계선 안에 단대게 침묵에서라서 지만 상계선을 써야 돼 단대네 지기 제제 탈신 버체네 상계선은 심지하게 되게 탈신 버 두게 지긴 있어요 마도 지금 단대게 마셔시 단대가게 매스링가란 남준에시 희망한 상제선에서는 ante kemla ke sele do sang ka du chede ka tandan go chu ni ya do ni ya che chen ne sang che so re thar shin suna tele ja ne sem je ta thar shin ba chu bin se tandan go chu cha ni ya do ya de la ku yo ra o che so da tende samlu sta ne sem je tham je ge tanda so so ke wa chung chung je sa ba ne chim ba chu de so ba ka re na tanda chung chung de je de pe ke wa thar shin ba chu tu ge ge chimbe 파르도 침바주지 소베 파르도 침바주 준비 파르 침바주지 겨고세 연대 군대지 랑도르게 내 탐제 신경이 강사신 교와 작인이세 티 교르선은 예심제 창말에 팬도 럽침부치 투르에 삼자 어디에도 텐데 람데 냐에 돈달이야 터바셰 당보산제 가르송도 섬 터바셰 송차게 될래 소소 삼루다 오늘에 말에 삼루다 어디 오늘 야분도와 삼자 이신예서는 samjung shirapche o te ke so ane ni yana yando competition ta ga tol be che chu chene komba thoba da samba komba chene rimje ne sanje je ko ban chene je thoba cha simje thamje ge ta tup thong ge ta tharshi ba tup thong ge sanje je ko ban je thoba cha te che to te thobche ge lamla thoba da samba kombe rimje ju bar cha o jamne ne che ne be kulun se tam ne samba shus ha ten de
So here, when we talk about like all sentient beings, often in our prayers and so forth, we are talking about all sentient beings, but this is something that needs to begin with those around us, right? We need to change how we interact with, how we look at the beings that are close to us. So we begin with our friends, our family, our neighbors, those who are around us, and expand that more and more and more. And so if we don't do it in this way, where we actually are changing how we interact with the beings around us, we just remain how we are. We get angry, we get jealous, we yell at them and so forth. But yet then we go sit on our cushion and we're talking about all sentient beings. It's like, well, where are all of these sentient beings? It's almost as if they must be in some other world or something, or we're talking about some sort of amorphous group of beings that is somewhere else that is not connected with us. But really, this is not how we should be going about training our minds. We begin with those who are right in front of us. We recognize that they are no different than us in wanting to have happiness and wanting to be free from suffering. And recognizing that fundamental equality, we treat them all in the same way, regardless of their religion or who sort of their ethnic group or who they might identify with. The way we are able to see all sentient beings as equal is really in connecting with their wanting to have happiness and wanting to be free from suffering. And so we don't just develop our mind in a kind of partial way, but using the methods of, say, for example, the sixfold cause and effect. We recognize that in the past, all sentient beings have acted as like our kind mother, other than our not recognizing that because they have changed lives, they have moved into a different kind of existence. We can see like the person that we feel close to in this life, our mother, the one who takes care of us, we don't know where she will go in the next life. We will be in a kind of situation where she's unrecognizable to us. So when we see that, yes, it's very easy when someone is being affectionate and kind towards us to feel that, oh yes, they want to have happiness and they want to be free from suffering. We need to recognize that all beings have acted in that capacity towards us. It's only a matter of our not recognizing it because we have moved lives. So we have to develop that kind of recognition and expand it outwards. We expand from those that we are close to. We begin by changing our minds, by treating others as though they want to have happiness and they want to be free from suffering. And in that way, we are able to get to the point where, like a Buddha, we have this impartial kind of wish for all sentient beings to be happy and all sentient beings to be free from suffering. But if we don't develop it and expand it in this way, then again, we're talking about all sentient beings as though it was a group somewhere in some other country or some other world. And so here we have to begin right now where we are at, and we develop these kinds of qualities slowly over time. It's not as though as some might think that, oh, well, when I get to be a Buddha, if I were able to become a Buddha who has perfected all good qualities, who has complete knowledge of all that should be adopted and should be abandoned, well, then I'm going to work for the benefit of sentient beings. But rather, we are progressing towards that, right? We are trying to get to the point of a Buddha, one who has perfected all good qualities and eliminated all faults. But we start right now. It's not as though benefiting other sentient beings begins at the state of Buddhahood, but all of the kinds of actions that we undertake, however small it might be, we should say, well, should go towards the perfection of generosity, or this ethical conduct, may this go towards the perfection of ethics, may this go towards the perfection of patience. And in that way, we are trying to develop ourselves slowly over time to become a being who has a perfect knowledge of all that should be adopted and abandoned. And so it isn't as though we're like waiting to attain, like have a magic sort of magically become a perfectly enlightened Buddha, but rather we are developing and moving toward that state. And so here, when we are listening to these teachings, we should be doing so with this kind of attitude that I am listening to this in order to be able to develop this within myself. Based upon thinking about these teachings, may I myself develop the qualities of a perfect Buddha, be able to achieve that state in which I am then able to perfectly benefit other sentient beings. But again, we shouldn't think that it's something that will come in the future. This is a practice that begins now, and it begins with those that with whom we interact on a regular basis. So please set such a motivation for listening to the teachings.
Oh yeah. Oh, that machine do so. That we tang ma de chi. When they say thing yam do lam ne ya wo da. Ta shen yam je se chi ta mar she se de ngan ju chi ro che chi sa. Nyam ba se de ta de wan do le tung me do ba shen do shen de wan do le tung me do nyam ba de se da. Ani shen da to so su mi ri chi ba da chu lu chi ba ten de ka ri ne me na. De wan do le tung me do ba nyam ba de ora ka ga. Pe na mi ni yu ba che. Chi so su mi ri chi ba che chi mi ri shen da che. Kuni tung nyam ba da da chi yu na. Ngara chung ko ne ko tung de se so su mi ri chi ba de tung se de sam lo che. Pho jo de chi ba chi ja kuni nyam ta wa chi ne chi de le ba che ne me ro ra ta ko tung de tung yin be che se gu re sam sa cha gu do. Tung yin je ti se cha se ra ge tung de tung sam sa se gu re sam go re. Pho jo me de tung de ran de chi ba nyam go ne te tung yin be che se gu re. Dewa yin be che tu cha de te ne mi ni re je sam lo ta yin na mi ri chi da ma che ke ba ke me de ko yin da da nyong go ne chi de mi ri chi ba re sha se tung se wa ta dewa che sam lo ta chi de yu sha ne me ro ra ko o ti so de se go ra nyam ba re ka ri che ne ya che go re ta che ko de yo ma ra che da dewa do le tung me do ba ra da nyam ba re cha ma tham je pen ju ye chi ba re ka she dewa tung se go re sa da ka she sam ma da ma ri tende cha ne ta shen yam ba se da ne ra chin ji thong ma me bo ne tende sam lo ta ne ma ri ne ta de bo to kho te re ta shen che wa se ra chin ji ta shen ya wa do lo ni che bu ja sam lo kho go do o ti che lab shan de ta de lab ko re che sha ya de re.
So here, I also feel like I should say we talked a little bit about the sixfold cause and effect method for developing bodhicitta, but really there is the method of equalizing and exchanging self and others. And here, the sort of reasoning of this is that whoever it might be, any sentient being has equally the desire to be happy and the desire not to suffer. So if we are to take two beings and say one is in your group, whether it's your religion or your race or whatever it might be, and one is outside of that, it's not as though in looking at them you could say, well, oh, the one that has, if they're both suffering, say, to say, oh, the person that's in my group, well, their suffering is greater just because they're in my group. It's the suffering is the same because it is suffering. Because a sentient being is suffering, this is something that is to be eliminated. And happiness, whether it is for someone in our group or any sentient being, is to be accomplished because it is happiness. happiness. And so here, not distinguishing like, oh, this is part of my group or someone I know, it's not appropriate to make such kinds of distinctions. When we look at the logic of equalizing and exchanging self and others, it's really based upon this fundamental idea that because it is suffering, it is something to be eliminated. And because it is happiness, it is something to be accomplished. So whoever it might be, all sentient beings are equal in that way. And therefore, it's inappropriate for us to only have concern with the suffering of those in our in-group.
Oh yeah, that is so. That is 당간도 내려서 쇼로가 숨주 쏘고 뒤봐. Oh yeah, 디카르도 세나 니바 셰체레도 니바데 카르레도 세나 다 템바마오서 시딘 도르드니 템바시레도 템바마오 셰도와 아니 짐바도 와셰 대주 강가 시지셰서 어딘 도르드디 셰바 셰레도 디칸데르도스나 텐동세 템바마오테로와 동아스데 짐바 동아라 소바테스거라 텐동 시다시 시와 샨디 시와 잡으면지 시원해 되소라 시럽당스도다 아니 최단지네 니가 그 랑도지 시럽야고 심바테시거라 디시부디바 디시부딘 도르드니 셰기거라 상부신데 명안에서 어때다고 상부시다 데베 메용부데스 다 개볼 담바선자 메원 개볼 시거라 상부신데 명안에 네 최선 넘버시다고 최 상부 넘버시부데 담바다 동하다 네 쇼다 시러라 소바테즈베 참마게 이도와다 페 야부 가와체서리레도라 최선 넘버시다고 ane te chingenge ane kebutia minambye ane tobar yuruse te shibude kebe yamle chebe yena te shidele mitsangme kawa chebe nase kebula te shida demba sonza ane kebula be tonga tano kebude be demba le ichi chingere demba trambu demba trangten chigiri samsaro ane chigi chimba tonga la sobata ane shiwal ne da shirabla soba samma shengere samje ane mima chupa teba da kawa chigre ese atandare do menam chene tebar yurs ya hoti chilap chandri do.
So here, picking up where we had left off in the text, beginning with verse 139 or 39 of the second chapter, wherein it is giving a kind of a summary of these four qualities, qualities of truthfulness, generosity, tranquility, and wisdom. So a king who has these four excellent qualities will be praised by gods and humans, just like these four excellent dharmas. So here, these then are qualities which the king is exhorted to have. So here, where it says a king who has these four excellent qualities, so truthfulness, being generous, having a kind of peacefulness, not being sort of coarse or unruly, and the wisdom that has appropriate knowledge. If you are endowed with those qualities, will be praised by others. Others will look to you, knowing that you are truthful, that you are sort of pacified, that you have the kind of wisdom and knowledge that others might rely upon. And so therefore, he is encouraging the king to develop these four qualities.
Oh yeah, that's the matter. Oh yeah, that's the matter. Oh, tenikara. Oh, that draw keber changi changi se to do. Draw keber changi changi se. Oh, the car show to sana. Yeah, that a lot of matter. Shouldn't them watch it inside. Da paper mashi ta curba se do. Paper mashi ta curba se. Oh, tene. Kebuge ne tisora. Kebuge ne shendaking oka peleche. Tebatochi kebu kabuchi samson tene chichi chewdo yabuchi setinde. Ngoka peleche ne shed nyengu marisera no goko nyangayora. Mikanga chi chera chichi sege ka yabusha jila. Trambu temba de malavice, Jabula Lenchen getting the order, or to paper machine said, Jabulia Moka Pele Checha, Ketchin get to the Yawuni or Marisora, or Temba Shangan, one nation get to Yawuni, would they say, paper machines, paper machines, and then, paper machine, Tajur was. Telia ichicha ormato shandali ichicha yomaresera peba mashense ane deba choshe de tajurwas de dujun choshe juba de samba number taba chkore soso de deba choma da choshe ba chkore sora tiene sem number taba jurkure sora deba chombu chana ane mena sago saya ta ane chikwe sago choma de mandin mambo saya soso chichala mambo saya samutana ane yawe umarwa this on the tendency you ma so cabolia chikarina kayovati chokshe the vachu the chokshe over mado and it me peshat into mamute get the abuche yawum shandati chodi meva tempati ungumara or paper mashe tajurba se shirab ninji setara number tabachu vachera and it should and jigdangi chawat sama tamjalia and it should have done them bakwa chodan jigdan jawa tamjale shen shen gora ma shen ne me kar se do tag dag che ne go go te gra so so shen ne so so ta che de rang che de rang do ji so so samru ta thu ro de ma re ti che wor sam sa samru ta thu ro oh ya ke so da chodan jigdan jawa ka ga le ya lang do kan de che go be ka re kyen yen ba ka re yen de yen ba ka re che go be ya wo shen ba shen yen de go de se gora ane nam ju ne kong do ta bu che jo ma de Troa chunju chewde, Kondo Tava Mela, Shelia, Dewan Debe, Chambada, Ninjila, so what Tinder Yabu, Desera, Troa, She Chunju Che, Shelia, and Pemba Debe, Pemba, Pendege Samba, Ninjita, Roa Chambala, so what Tinder Yabu, Desa, Ninja Timita, Jamebaya. The Lenji, Gona Taduya. Shirotane, Chuja Pes, Ordered. Oh, Taji Denji Chawakarina, Kagashiro Dembache, and then the Chuchoshi Shera. Oh, Chuche. Nishale appended Debe. The day the Kasure, you and then Shibuti Sura, et Timameba Dana, and the Tato Nishirabda, Tato Nishirabda, Chi and then to the Apevada. Nichizo the Abuton to the Essie daughter, yeah, didn't do that. Should have done the church and pace. Yeah, didn't do that.
Yeah.
This one,
Diesel.
oh yeah.
So then the next verse deals with a kind of definition of a special friend or the kinds of friends with whom one should associate. So here it says in verse 140, wisdom and dharma always increase in a king who consults those who are restrained in speech and pure and possess undefiled wisdom and compassion. So here, in speaking about a kind of a person on whom one can rely as a king, it should be someone who, as it says here, is restrained in speech. This is a person who isn't just speaking in order to flatter you or to please you, but rather is speaking in a way that is beneficial, that is actually trying to be of some kind of benefit. So here, if someone is just kind of speaking in order to flatter you, you don't know whether what they're saying is true or not. But a friend like this is someone who is speaking in a way that is actually beneficial, whether or not it might be something one wants to hear. And additionally, someone who is restrained in the sense of having few desires and being easily satisfied is someone who has a kind of pure mind, one could say, in that, again, we don't have to question their motives. If someone has few desires and is easily satisfied, it's less likely they are trying to sort of cheat you or deceive perceive you for something other than just trying to tell the truth. And so here, someone as well who possesses undefiled wisdom and compassion is a friend with whom one should associate. So, someone who is able to, based upon their wisdom and knowledge of both the Dharma and worldly affairs, is someone that one can trust. As well, someone who has the kind of demeanor wherein they are have less anger and a wish to benefit others, the kind of compassion that wishes to benefit others, and they aren't sort of stained with this kind of disharmony with others. This is the kind of person that one should rely upon, and wisdom and dharma always increase. So, whatever kind of activities one is engaging in, to consult with someone who, again, will speak beneficially, not just trying to flatter you, will speak in a way that is based upon their having few desires and being satisfied, and they have the sort of knowledge of what should be done in a worldly context or a dharma context. By relying upon such friends, as well endowed with compassion, then a king can sort of sustain society well. This is the way to keep society going in a good way.
다당다 데티시도 전전럽전에 개와 폐 교개발전을 때 마시도 개와 개보고 자와 야보 상부도 야 폐에 교개발전을 때 거래 지난해 저 개발전을 때 마시 로봇도 개발전을 때 거래 메도 로봇 간주만 때는 담에다 세전 거고다 냐가 여봐 저저 개와티 개비 자와 상부 자와 지도 종에게 자와 상부도 야보제 표알이야 ene to kebar chala tamba stambu ti shegdo o ti ki ke shegdo ta to kebar chala tamba to di pebar ma she ta jurba shirab ning ji timeta ane ka se lenji go na ta to shirab dan de chöja peso o tinde de to kebar chala tamba ine kebar shinde ta ta de shege ro yende te so dan dembe to de tengi na ine kebu si kyo ala kewa to ka ga ya 펜도 그래서 계속도 뒤뒤 버쳐라 아니버데 야 어디 질랍잖아
No. So here, just to give the context to giving this definition of a special kind of a friend, this is under the heading of sort of how to rely upon the causes that increase virtue, that increase and develop good qualities. And so the first of the three topics here is the definition of a good friend. If it is the case that a king wants to rule society well, or sort of have that kind of good fabric of society, then they should rely upon friends who are not going to cheat them, who don't have ulterior motives. And so here, by having a friend or having friends who have these kinds of qualities of speaking in a way that is beneficial, speaking in a way that is restrained, having undefiled wisdom and compassion, this then is one of the causes of increasing wisdom and dharma for the king, or really in society.
Oh yeah, that to kebar change change de she san that de jesu jogo de se jogo de sambabe namda che ya ti ke che sheba to le nyen che ne te na shi che che jogo de se ra ne ka me ka pele shen ge ta pesha mambol nor chala cha ne tinde se ne nor do ra o ti ma che ta nye ba de da 대 제순 주게 봐서 저 개발신 전이다 되면 가사 건조가 라브나 신체 소소 삼로다 타주시고 말도 메다메다게 펠레 생게다 노르잘라 소소 차네 tin데션 대 제수 조다네 콜로티라 야고 말와 대 제순 주게 봐서 티셰도 니버들어 담보체라 tin데버세 니니버레도 아래 니버체다 다 펜바르마와 콤바데 치다네코 소소리아 개본데 치나코 소소 펜도 여버들 랍게 콤보데 코라 가보 가레 지기도 다네 아니다가 펠레셔야다 노르잘라다 tin데티 소소 tonda 중게다 tin데케지 생게 로고 생게 망보 연구라 마동원에 개베시 짱열이야 장보도 템베토네 야고 체체파 Pemba Manga Chitane, so Pendo, you were the longer Combure, said. So Tandare Mato Cable, Sick and Yabujo, Lamge Yoyo, the Combure, said. Pemba no Mawa combates. Nyambar Shiba Teaku, Pendo Yovas Lamgaina, telling Yangan Kabu Yorese. Pendo Mevas a Pele Shet, Nor Chalata Chichi, Kabu Yang Oka Pele Shet, and Gogo Tese, non do say the telling Yangan the Manga de Mato. Ngone me trambush and get the Nyambu Kaja Nyambushita Yomara, Kerano Kudu Chichi Chichi, Tendesi Jum with the Chever Senaco New Yora. Sako Pele so Kerampe, I would have done that in the same one, she says. Lamnanu Gogo Te Nyagayora. Pemba Mawa Kumba, the Yambarsheba, Shindukura. The Dawaja, Minya, Pembe Chesu Chebacus. Tinane Janko Kitchen Yambo Mabachi, Shesona, Tina Shiche, the Teleja Kumba, Sara. Corana draw a kitchen Yambo Shingachuna, Tina Shichimado, Temba Yenayan, Tita, some Janico. Kasha, Yambarsheba Shindukura. Kita veja minya keje nyembu ramene kira no kudu chi sana keje nyembu mena temba ina teacher suge tele je kombure sera koran kar samna tika chi dura chene no du mamu yongara o te indu ka sura keje nyembu mena ya ro keje nyembu mena ya te keje tambu temba shenge tele nyengu de sigara oh this was Nyambar Sheba Shinduku, Tada Veja Minya, and then Casa Pembe Chis, Sheba Kunsa, or Niba, Tada Veja Gaza Nyambu Manaya, Da Pembe Chis, Sheba de Shindukumbu de Esa, Tendechi Yoma Resa, the door, Tichik Che, the Oma de Tendechiba the door. Oh, Tada Vena Minya answer, Tada Vena Gaza Nyambu Manaya, Tambo Temba and get the Sosu Yango de Mato, Sosu Lawan. Kesi keba she shateli nyanyo ma rechara. Teta wana minya ya pembara chene yodu chose. Kesi nyambu mene ya chitane pendo yoba chene ti nyabadu chegu resi wara. Pena sura. Nesu tendo ta chambes. Kena nata rechi nata de soya tendo liya. Soso liya tali chambada tsawa yunge zoge. Mehla sopa tende kabo. Sakabo shevden take this era, could negative the Navras you are the Tandal Copengiora, or Tia Tengu, Tina Shiriesora. Teach a Yambu man, I can't teach Yena, Yavarese, Pena. Ne soya Tondalia, Dali Chamba, that's all you get to Mitsu, and then Sambu Manga man, Saya to Tatas and a Shakshu Shell sober, Tindayora, and Shakshu Chene, Agri Sigra, Chenam Yuchana. To sha chi ka yaw de ma ro te ina o ti son de je ke le nyen go de si go ya ti chi lam na ti do.
So then the next topic is how it's logical to then follow after such good friends. When we know that someone is speaking truthfully, speaking in a way that is beneficial without looking for, say, wealth or power or something for their own good. Here it then turns in 141 to describing how it is logical to follow after such friends. So those who speak beneficially are rare. So when we think about in general, those who are really speaking out of truthfulness, out of not their own aims or wanting to get something from themselves, but rather thinking about solely being of benefit, speaking based upon truth, that is something that is quite rare. And even more rare are those who listen. So most of the time, when those are, say, especially giving advice to a king, for example, they might be in it for their own aims. They're saying something to try to flatter the king, to be able to get something for their benefit, to be able to get some kind of wealth. But those who speak from a position of actually wanting to benefit are quite rare. And rare, too, are those who actually listen when that advice is given. And even more rare than that are those who quickly implement something beneficial. So here, even if it is unpleasant to hear, it is something where if that speech is beneficial, this is something you should engage in. Right? When we hear something that maybe isn't pleasant to hear, like, oh, you're making a mistake, oh, you're doing that wrong, but it's out of a place of benefit, it can be quite difficult to listen to that and actually put that into practice. So, however, if the speech is honest, if it is truthful, if it is based upon trying to be beneficial, even if it is unpleasant to hear, this is something that one should follow after, one should listen to, as is explained in the verse that follows, saying, having realized that something beneficial is unpleasant, you should quickly put it into practice, just as a prudent person, in order to become healthy, takes medication even though it is noxious. So, like the example of when we have to take some kind of medicine that might be unpleasant, or, these days we could talk about having to do some sort of a surgery. In general, getting cut into is not something that we see as being good. But when we recognize the benefit, we are willing to undertake that in order to heal ourselves. And so, too, those who might speak words that sound unpleasant, but they are beneficial, if you are prudent, if you really want to benefit from that, even if it seems unpleasant, that is something that you should listen to. You should put into practice, even if it is difficult, just like taking a medicine that might be unpleasant.
오야 다 개화폐에 교개발전 라고 숨버드 시에도 처음에다 바꾼 바세드 시에도 개보코나데 메타바 콤바테 시에도 티카세도스나 소다 네메 게시다스 다테코 게시종에 교개발시 간데 되고랬으나 처음에다 바다 저저 강에다 바에서 삼을 내가 정부 템버치라 대디가 따도 되게 삼나 근데 노드 마부체 시마네 티 식타만데 마부 초제네 골로체기라 대사는 본부도 마부 코란테 간테 골로 마부체 근데 제마체치도 가부체 전에도 가다면도 요에도가 잠메다 바디 딱바리스테 간테 매삼 대지른가 내가 정부체네 마다 시마뇨다 용삼사 되고 요라 티 좀달라 시기도 te karsu dosana tene soda neme geshe dase soda naza mebara soso cheda ne naza meba sobu tanda yimatelia gege mambu yode serwa saya toya ta naza chi dameda naye dati ge mambu yoda lu choya ta ra naza meba chete telia naza gyugi mambu yongure chele parche mambu yode 개개 망보 연계치레서 거라 제가 템부 쉐부 딱바 템부 베틀수 땡기 쉐부 이렇게 말해 스티 삼다 그래서라 소다 네메 게시다세 네메 바다라 소수 체테다 소수 탕부인 바테다 개비시 개기 왕자테다 저도 참만 메다바인 바데 저 같으이나 섬샤고래서 거라 소소 챈디 따도 땡게 말에 섬 대베링들 개와 약부체 치조 약부점 약부체고요 삼사 치말에 팽거리 델레 팽거리 삼사시고라 나자 매버데 단다 소부 당당히 섬 대요 말 나차 루불도 좋네 담면다 차시부데 자와지에 정부 템버체고래서라 개베시 왕자데 텐데게요 말와 대님저 샤야레 되어라 진데 대저 상만보다 삼루다네 대주 대베링들라 국가비베링들라 약부지가 삼루트 땅고래서라 미다니네 따공데서 어디서 강가 미다바인 삼사 대주 강가 샤야인 삼 단다 마샤 제베링들라 약부지고 삼사 대삼토고래서라 가르스는 내매베 타데 내레도라 소게 타데 쳐레도라 왕자라 소바 빼주 타데 고 대화레도라 담마 대화레도라 어딘데 삼루타나 대베 른델이하고 제야지 삼루코고요라 그러니까시네 미다니네 따공데세 전에 양다 전대바르세 전에 양다 전대바르 철라직도 nendenzeese ota tezo kangade samlo konerwa mitanyela soba tezo kombala tenese ura ane chö dan tumbe chawali ya nenden zene zay ku re se. Kare za chö mayimba lomna ane te sama kyo chema tunge nyoya le soba da chen de la yabu me te sama sungyo ra. Oh, ni kare. Chundu dan denbe ko ne chö la ne chö dan tumbe chawala nenden zo se wara ta tunda. Oh, te chi lapshan de do. Oh, oh yeah, this.
So then third is again under these sort of special causes for increasing virtue is then meditating continuously on death and impermanence, as comes in verse 143. So here, this is another cause of sort of increasing virtue is contemplating death and impermanence. When one recognizes that, for example, for a king, that their power, as well as their life and so forth, are impermanent, they do work that is honest during the time that they have that. So we see there are a number of leaders who seem to think that things are permanent, or they act in ways that are for their very short-term benefit, and end up, say, going to prison later because of the consequences of that. And so rather than thinking that what one's life, one's power, one's rule is somehow permanent, it says here in verse 143, you should always reflect upon the impermanence of life, health, and political power. The very life that we have is not something that is going to remain. The kind of health that we might enjoy temporarily is something that is impermanent. There are so many conditions that can lead to our health deteriorating. And a power that one might have, the authority that one wields, is not going to remain forever. It is rather something that is impermanent. So we shouldn't think and act in a way as if, oh, things won't change. This is all going to remain just like this. But rather recognizing that even for a king, say, their rule is impermanent. This will one day go away. But the kinds of actions that one does in the course of that rule are going to lead to results in the future. When you have that sense of impermanence, that while you have that power, while you have that authority, you act well in order to ensure that it is going to bring good results in the future. So recognizing that the end of our life is death, the end of like whatever sort of we have accumulated is going to be decline. The end of any sort of wealth that one has gathered is going to be the depletion of that. When you consider impermanence, you do those things in a way that is sort of with integrity, doing that well. And so here, where it says then, um, uh, reflecting up, you should always reflect upon the impermanence of life, health, and political power. That way, you will, with true effort, strive uniquely to practice the Dharma. So, recognizing impermanence causes us to turn away from that which is non-Dharma, recognizing that whatever sort of causes we create now, we will have to experience the results of those in the future.
Oh yeah. 다 데리다 다 니바 년제 주디 쉐도아 년제 주디란 도르덴 바다 개베셰 쉐쉐 디나리다 년제 주 도르덴 바데 레도안디 담 어 데메 사와 치주르신 세데라 니바르도 테니 시그레 세라 센디 두타토 네게지 마로 신에 티베 동에 와서 시에 제소 티베레 제바데게 동에 교황에 발레야 다 동해 주치기를 해서라 시대에서 대खे받아내서라 최도 되나야서 내급지 약고래진 두삼네 기변에 또서 여기 예나야 특별히 얘네 지기요 말이셔라 푸스 내그래 해서라 내가 편도 춘주 이거 절 때는 교화지만 동해 잡은 용거는 말이죠 자자 미대 최도 대회다 보이 편도 여봤다 보면 좀 해봤다 보 통나야 교화 치마 때 남민 잡은 용거래 뒤선다 특별 교화 미리 소서 특별히 간대시 이나야 돈다 내가 편도 여배서를 지나 tel고 거네 내주요 말에 교화 치마 동해 요엔다 유령부 삼을다니 디방에 되게 침부를 선거라 대면사와 친주신 신의 특별 동네 와서 시외 제수 틱바디글레가 가르스네 겨왕에 발레야 다 동해기 주치야 되래서라 시대에서 대캠바전에 최도 되나야세 최도 단단 내가가 그 매버지 대외 주를 통하여나야 뒤레들레 틱바 이네 뒤레들레 주바리 말해서 거라 제장 다단다 담에서와 치원 주신세 틱베드니 레드 가르스네 텐드디 파 쪼바치그레 텐드께와데 쪼주네 아니 년드께와 사바치레 주그레스오라 년드께와데 펜버치그레세 대체는 텐드께와데 쪼바타 년드께와데 파 펜버치기는 쪼제니가 그 거네 동해와 시대에서 마음바리 연주 동해와 시대 최도 대화다보 나나야 틱바기와 미리소스 어디송도 텔레안에 템바벨리오 롱트란제 제바날 텐데시 용고도 너롱 이렇게 그 가른도스네 개부촌에 소주 만제체세 개부팀 간데지네 소주도 방고로 하다 남바이나 소제베데 코스이네 소제 초마로 샹다 코코란 가리네 텔파베 니바타 초데 소디 세죠 말세 개부촌에 소주 만제체세 저거라 소네 신도 파스 정말이야 소드베 판쇼드베 제쇼드 치그레서라 일에 판쇼 제쇼 치그레서 대외 유리 치신더 바자세 유리 볼이야 체령분에 고유나 소주 방바되게 아니 겨와치마다 챈들에 이게 가서래 체령분에 줄에도 그래서래 샹기 소주 방바 샹기 체령분 용에 탑시 전에 라마발이 체령분 용에 줄에도 요라 대외 유리 체신 수대배서 유령부 생리 대되게 가사이나 아니 소주의 방고래서 소주에다니 미체디 요거 소주는 뭐만 소소 체통돌이 끼겨라 이기구나 소주에 삼어서 소응어스 제기도 파셔 삼로코랑 코르기요 말에 당기요 말에서 소주에 삼을 때 마다시 진짜 sonza 트레드 중세 동해야 푸수펜바 교화된도서 어디를 트레드 중세배 야가르시나 틱바이니 지기어 말에 트레드 중세 내버리시나야 네가서래 동해 중세장 푸수펜배 단들에 지도도 가도서 대외 된데서 트레드 중세 두장 푸수펜배 아니 교화 자꾸 받을 때 말해서 된데서 야 뒤제래야 어떤 뒤에 대통령도에도 당마를 야카 뒤에 발로션을 뒤서래 라라는 지금 매통신 라라는 지금 매통신 뒤가 지금 통교로 왔어도 라라는 지금 매통신 자원가시 제발이야 로 라라데 카셀리아 sendelia jigbata kyake meba tabu thona yang sigora sendelia kyancha meba jibake meba thona yang sigora jigba meba thonshe chime deso ya jigba yeba thona chuna se sendelia da tende chawa de shuna kyake mena chimale tungye nyoya chuchi ina ati pangure sigora lala jigba me thonshe tyungari jigba thonjuro ase Delia, Tibele, to Tanda Delia came in Mama Balianchi, but to the Pancuora. Get the chigla eaten us or Chandelica Mendosum. Everyone in the Sendel teacher, Tanda teacher, and a cake mass, some Tibele, and a day of Marisera. Sendelica Mendosum, the Tibele, Chiguna, Tibele, the Mama Balia, Sechimalica, young good at some. Pang by the Carson Pagio Martella Jigni Panku, days ago. Did was Chawangashi Roa Chawangashi Lala Sudu Chawangashi Lala Kashas Lala Jigba Meton, she is Chawangashi Chabala Sendilla Jigba Mebaton, she came Mebaton, she is Chime Dulia and Jigba Yuba Ton Juba Ina Sigora Lala Jigba Meton, she tunga Jigba Ton Juruas. Oh yeah. Get the chilla eaten us. Sindele kyonge mendo asamsan tenje ane chawadele juba yina mande rese. Nikiwa chima dunga yongre samne o chima nami yongo re samne tele jini pangu rese gara. Sinde jiba meba tongshi chime tulia jiba yuba tonga jwa yina sigara. Kete chigla sindele jiba mendo sam kete chigla jiba matongwa yi toni a te ke mendo sindele ke mendo sam chawadele juba yina mande rese. O kiwa chima dunga yongo re da samje tele tene ni te pangu rese gara. Tone chola chigode minjide. ane jigu rese, kya chima tunga yunga tala jigu rese. O tiba tsi lamna, jigu kire. Yeah.
So then the next topic that we turn to is exhorting the king to abandon the cause of the lower realms, beginning in verse 144. So this, again, based upon the recognition that one won't remain forever, this is saying that we should avoid the kinds of causes that will lead to future suffering. So seeing that you will definitely die and that when dead, you suffer from your negativity, do not engage in any negativity, even for the sake of temporary pleasures. So it is certain that we will definitely die. And after having died, we will have to experience the results of the karma that we have created, the kind of propelling karmas, and those that are the accomplishing or sort of completing karmas. So here, if one has created the kind of causes for, say, being born in the lower realms, or even if born in the lower realms, also experiencing the kind of suffering that comes from those completing causes as well, if we can see, if we have a kind of faith that those results will come about, then you should avoid those kinds of negativities. We don't want to get cheated by thinking that for some sort of temporary short-term pleasure, it's okay to do something that will lead to long-term kind of suffering. So once this good rebirth that we have right now is exhausted, is used up, we are going to have to face the consequences of the actions that we have accumulated throughout this life. So here in the commentary by Gyaltsab, there is a verse probably from the sutras. It said from the chapter on sort of truthfulness, or the truthful speaker, that says, you king, don't take any kind of life. This is really, again, talking about the causes of being born in the lower realms. All sentient beings cherish their life most. I mean, when we think about what it is that we as sentient beings cherish the most, it is our life. And so this most cherished and special thing, we shouldn't take away from others. We shouldn't take the lives of others. And so by doing so, we not only cut our own life short, cut the life short of another, but we are creating the causes to cut our own life short. So therefore, one should give up killing, as well as even the thought of taking the lives of others. And so here, as it says there, like even if there is what seems to be some kind of short-term benefit, recognizing the long-term harm, this is something that one should avoid. And so it doesn't just apply to killing, but all of those other non-virtues. And continuing then into the next verse, 145, in some cases, the dire result of negativity is not observed. In other instances, the dire result is observed. If there is comfort in one, why do you have no fear of the other? So here, when we see, like for example, that, oh, well, this kind of bad negative action is going to result in something that is fearful. Like we recognize that the action itself is going to cause that kind of feared result. we avoid it. Now, there are some cases where we can observe that. We can see the bad result that comes to us. And if it is the case that we then shun negative actions, recognizing the bad results that will come about, why is it that we don't avoid those negative actions, even in the cases where we don't see the results that will come about, but we know they are coming? So here, maybe we think that there's, oh, this is going to benefit me right now, and sort of push aside those future sufferings. But we really shouldn't neglect to think about those. Seeing that we are going to experience the results of the actions that we have created, this is something that we should avoid in any case. So it isn't just the kinds of actions that we can, or the results that we can see that we should fear, but we should fear those that we can't see.
Oh yeah. Tanya ba ngendu ju gebar sheba de sheba ngendu ju de gebar sheba tenjen de shi ko ne changla chaba kawas tambu de changla chaba kawas o ne ni ba bang chen gu da gen le chaba ka ka wo ne yung da tambu de changla chaba kawa ngendu ju gebar sheba de changla chaba kawa de re sha o ti ka re to ne ngendu ju gebar sheba de shi do a ti na ne tambu de changla chaba kawas 창게 지대니에 주르시 창게 껴도 세요라 창통이나 담보된 지대바 담보니네 고 창통도네 창통게스레 샤삼 ene nyabjo chigre sora tongjo chigre so da ko changto rasi ne ko keje kanjuma ju she sheba kanjuma ju kyae che yongre som 담보니네 ko changtong게들 껴 통그레 서라 창게 지대니에 주신 지대바 주 nyabjo chig tongjo chigra 대에 노양 세번 주세. 상계 지대에 버 주세. 소소 던다도 내가 제이나 때 던다데 충동에 망보용으로 창통는 거 거네고. 전에 논주께 좀 망보셔던데 논주용으로 소소 던다 주에 대하고 두두 말을 쓰거라. 대에 쓰거라. 안 노양 세번 주세. 배사 망보태고네 또 와트 조선 땅텐데서네. 노라된 조바세 두래 저래. 노야 세번 주세. 창기 지대에 주세. 대에 노량 세번 주르세. 네 몸배샤 마인시세. 네 창통의 라시네네 시라시라 코라 셰바랑 신도 내어 말아 남진나시 말아. 네 거 논좀 마부시네 몸배 미시베 와게 저 마인바 마부 논좀 마부치 그래서 거라. 몸배 저 마인바 취시 마인배 저 취미이 지기 저 마부치 그래서라. donda nondru mambu chigre. Tewe changane taadu ponse, ate sonza changde kato ina pangure se. Tena na ko kesi change da tinde ne teleja pangura. Ne chang mambu lu, ne rasi, ne keche damada she kanga norche, nyanga chimbu yora. O te sonza changde kebule tamgi wada chidam mile changde pangure se tamgudwa. O change dande de kyunere de chipside, sheba rangshe do meneba, 요래길래 서로 사기 있어라. 남주 셰바데 미 셰바 쇼마 마임바데 대초요 말와 바라베르시 엔디 김나샤라. 배전하려고도 천둥 대화 공부한테 뇨아 대화 공부하시. 지스도 뇨서 버서 샤가 소소 september membership 아니 끼우레 서고 있어라. 근데 지도 남바전에 창리야. 개천부신에 가그라. 산제 좀 된데 진주인의 창 사제 시버점에 통화 매치 아세.
So the next turns to an extensive sort of explanation of the causes of lower realms, or those that are to be avoided, beginning with refuting attachment to alcohol, coming, or intoxicants, we could say more generally, coming in verse 146. So it says, from intoxicants come the world's disdain, your own failure, and the loss of your wealth. Confused, you do what you should not. Therefore, always refrain from intoxicants. So here, there are many faults that come from imbibing intoxicants. The first of which is that really you're sort of seen as contemptuous within the world. There's a kind of disdain. Others look upon you as being like, oh, well, that's someone who drinks alcohol or is constantly intoxicated. And so not only do you gain the disdain of the world, but many faults come from that as well. So you aren't able to accomplish your own aims. Becoming intoxicated, you aren't able to successfully carry out whatever work it is that you might want to accomplish. And not only that, but your wealth is exhausted. Intoxicants cost money, and therefore, when you engage in them, if you're constantly buying alcohol, your wealth will also be depleted. And out of the kind of lack of conscientiousness, the delusion that comes from being intoxicated, you no longer are able to distinguish between what you should and shouldn't do. And so therefore, the kinds of faults that come, again, the world's disdain, your own failure or inability to accomplish the aims that you might want, the loss of your wealth, and the kind of confusion in which you lose your own ability to distinguish what is right and wrong or what you should and shouldn't do. These are the reasons that one should always refrain from intoxicants. So here, when someone drinks or imbibes other intoxicants, generally they act in ways that they might not normally. They might say whatever it is that comes to their mind. The things that they should and shouldn't do become irrelevant. There is a kind of, again, we mistake this sort of disturbance of mind as being happiness. Like we're sort of out of it. We can't really identify anything. We can't really think clearly about anything. And some mistake this as a sort of happiness, a kind of pleasure. Although in reality, it is the kind of cause that is going to lead to our downfall, to our ruin. So intoxicants are something, therefore, that should always be refrained from.
Oh yeah, that never get to never the shake do. Take a rest, ni gamble chaba kava said the do. Never do. Kava do so. Oh, the never gamble cha change. Short of the jaya, the pa jaya, the tindora. Can't do any demonstration to share your Shobacha, Shota, pa jaya, the Sandra Medayo, can't do it. Oh, tell a chaba de Miracer. Oh, take our sudosana. Till I can't go share your Cambuche Atelia, can't shan any chit Atelia, can't go your details from the teacher or Rigma Resum Gora. Cambo, Chowda, can't do the teacher Atelia. And me no la chakbe yore, not nor the could not the tumna some gira. The Machilimba double Jewish or Machilimba. Pajo de special tend to your mara. Tana coco or Pajo the magician to go, the Koya Tapsichira. Jamoche any candy shaz and a tumna some day. Tambunang Amda Yora. Chazan Koti, Tambudelia, Carrioresna. Chakatama. Shanjan no la chakbe yore. Tanga could special the tumna some gira. And then Tata you show you some young rang the show my some young mega yore. Because somebody give your mother Tambuchi in the Chichen Tasho to Madura some say. Mega younger. In a condo younger, Chita demanded that get shed on the Chita demanded condo saboteur, Kongamda or show you some Tawayasa. Or Jendeko condo younger, the meteor, and Koshida condo saboteur. And then corridor. You don't do younger. You're Chinese member the end of the man on the share the chicken Mambuchi or a Chamachidusa. Not the children of the share, chick man of the share of chick. Pursuing go night and the mother share order. You choose her. I never you choose her. When the same bear told the casca that they may when they may some sympathy or name or go with her. Go by nature. And then soon doesn't share when I take the to shake it. My gay shake it. I say, go with night and that. Six within the cage to just in the shake it. They thought to Pambar, what they thought to change the Panku days of Gora. Cambuche, tell a Kuyo days. What I can't go down the Taman song, change no la Chakmachi or day. Era, and it changed be told them Metonia and the same Mikiwa Yungure, and it's some sort of condo Yungure. You chigre, she don't the man of the Mambuche would have can't get this. Or to name. Change I get a children so kyun mambu yonghe duwa. Wa techi labna digduwa. Tanda ko mi no ma chimba limbe dabu chagduwa. Mi chala de lo tangni tegyo maro tabsaga chegotide tanda ko mi chala de deba meshin de koya tabshi chigara. Ya deso.
So then next is refuting gambling. Gambling, all kinds of games that we might play, like dice or cards or all of those sorts of things, here are listed as having 9 different faults. So the verse reads, gambling causes attachment, unpleasantness, and anger, deception, trickery, and an occasion for wildness, lying, pointless chatter, and harsh speech. Therefore, always refrain from gambling. So, gambling or sort of playing games to win the wealth of others often becomes sort of like stealing, because we are really trying to get the wealth of others without them giving it to us, right? When we win it in a game of gambling, in a game of dice or whatever, it's not as though they want to part with this. So in some ways, this is very much akin to stealing. So here, as far as the various faults that come from gambling, when we ask, well, what are the 9 sort of faults? First is attachment to others' wealth. Again, there's a kind of covetousness. We want to take the things that others have, even though they don't want to give them to us. So there's that sort of almost like stealing quality to this. And so there's also unpleasantness in the sense that our mind is mentally unhappy. When we are engaging in gambling of any kind, there's a kind of like worry. Oh, am I going to win? Am I going to lose? Am I going to lose my wealth? And so forth. And so there's, we're sort of on edge. We don't experience kind of happiness in that, but rather there's a mental unpleasantness that we can experience. We can also have anger. We get mad when we say don't win, or we don't get what we want. Gambling also leads to deception and trickery, trying to deceive others to get those things that we want without being honest. And then it also leads to things like an occasion for wildness. I mean, when we're sort of in the throes of gambling, we might do and act in ways that we don't normally do. Also, there is lying. Again, when we want to win something from someone else, we might be inclined to lie, to deceive them in some way. Gambling also leads to pointless chatter and harsh speech. We might, in the course of our gambling, say things that are quite harsh to others. And so, therefore, always refrain from gambling. Here it lists out these 9 kind of defects of gambling. And again, it's being akin to stealing, right? There's this sense of we are trying to take the wealth of others through these kinds of untoward means. And so gambling, not only does it have all of those kinds of faults, but it's almost becoming like stealing in a certain way.
Oh yeah. Ta dere ka sara ko le so. Oh yeah, ta sumba dira. Oh sumba peme jelu mechawa chir ka was. Oh mechawa peme jelu mechawa ka batalia. Ane sumde che do ta je sum. Oh mechawa chir ka pa se tere. Ta tambu dira. Oh dite tambu le yapo chinge na ma don ti yongya. Nima nga ti shegan do ka she shegan do ba. Ti khadu le ti. Ate te peme le kenje re sha se. Te me do se shek do. Ti daura shi ora fatati. Sa di samgura. Di kom konge de kar kom gora sana. Chigda rabdu chunga to. Ke lo yena peme le chak ba de. She chembu yona ko kyun ta ko gara shi ta. Peme yena peme rabju ma yena kebe le ya. Shenja chunga yena te shenja do ya chido. Phojo de yanden de samma ta kyun samma ta gora. Ko ke ti mare samja. O ti chane shegi war ma do chidan ko me changmalya te ke shegi wa mara. Rabju chwa. Niba de ko dra chumbare chaya che shanda la ya. Ne dan lu dan longje lu chakba peche meba che. Ane che keba pomo chakba la soba tele shenja chimbo yo na. Ane tiba shiye to dali ante kyon te samlutange. O tendre ka sumbre che samlutango yora. Tima do de chidan ko pemele kyon cheba mare. 티 시게바나래 코르 세바도 다와다고 시게바 제바나래 세부요래 티 rabju keba yena peme gi lula shenjan do ko yona ti ta ko rese peme yena kebe lula shenjan do ko ne kebe lu me sa ta ko rese yore o tanda dinale de olia yongu do ta ko ran nale yongu do peme lula me sa ta rese tina she so so lu kebe lula me sa ta ko rese chikba rese ti she yo na ma do yandi kel kenje chege yo ma de sheba bote rabju imbe chane ko shenja kesade peme lesuda telia shenja yene shenja dogbe tandal ti cheku yora ko chedan kimba yene shenja dogbe ke mene ko ti ke ta ko ke yo mara ta shigi yo mara samsang de pecha yante be ka we yora peme lukte ba ta chukde ma bu she yor ti de ko kabdun kare na ting he gure peme le me za she de sa keba yene peme ge le shenja dogbe ne te samtang gure rabjo ma yene kebe le ya samlu tang ko ma to chi ti cho chi kang jang le ti si yo ma ra o ti ya ni wo ma to me le kyan ji chi bi si ti sam ju yong ko o ti nang be lo li chane pe me le kyan ju se de yo ma re ko te ba da chi pe ja ka shi na te be ka yo me na dran dra chi bi ma to chi le sang ma da me chang wa chi de sa ke ba da pe me ni ga le me chang wa chi bi ma to chi ti chang wa re chi so wa te de se yo ma ra nga di 치르바이네 르마도즈 르디베 쪽바르시라 김나 포함해서 컨트롤하고 나를 용주고 말아 실로샤비라 앞에 거주 김나 포죠 뭐 추통사 가가지고라 그 르디 메상하리시거라 남바상제 좀 되서도 싸외 다든 생기 동바서래 르르 가게 메상에는 다다데서라 카셰 빼말게 카셰 잠줄게 근데 말에 계속 규제 찍바리 밤에 구달된 계속 내 찍바 찍냐래 가가 르 메상에는 가가 찍바리서 때 릭토메 챙게도 저게 릭 마셔데 개치 챙게다 도저히 릭 시대 텐데 찍으라 릭 아셔데 캐리다 잠시릭세라 테베릭세라 텐데 찍으라 어때서 상계 대송도 와 특히 좀 얘네 저 르리아스 당초 세대 제요 막 찍바 찍자래 소래 봐 아니 건저 르디 미자와 찍바이나 잠시이나 다 돌바이나 다 찍바래세 교전이 찍바래 계산이 찍바래 디케케면도 와서라 다 말에 그 장매르 장외 다들 생기 동바세 아주 동담에 시시그라 얘네는 장외 다들 생기 동바세 르메 장한다 다다야 장외 다지 가봐요서 잠시도 다 고란 장만 있으라 르에 장마 다야 장마 지부디 다야 쪽바 르에 쪽바 시게라 장외 다들 생기 동바세 장매 다지요 말에서 찍바 찍자 르메 장외 얘네 르레고 타데베 장매 다지 로가요 말에서 다를 장마장 지에요 말에 르레 장마장 지에요 말이지 nenden chenpo che kagiyora, o sanje rango songshayora. O ti inde, kanyeme loje mambudwa. Temi pet, rigma shuechi rabdu chung, sanje chumdende. Ane pe lungbo kana chebo da cheba kanga ya taga yone, te sanje, one te revese kandishkoda, digyo revese. Ne sanje sanda, o de kanga chikbari cheba yogare. Di ko de mambo yung do nalia o di kanga chikba de da se re to ma de namdo so sha ma do kanga chikba chi ya de ke sa mi ne ri ti yang ni yo ma de se da so so cheba le ba da nyen ba che ne cheba sang bu du nyen ba du se de le yung ge ma do ri ke sa mi ne to ga che de ya ga chi ni yo ma de se song gu do a long ba de ta nyen me chi so ning ba ro de kanga ha le de che bu du zo be ke da che ne sanje kundu kechi de ga yung do Kingone revese kena rigma pomochi rabdu chongarese. Pe rabdu choni yachi tombora che de choyo mara kondu chilo de shibu tuja che rangshingi tuja re che wara. Suso namdo so shab ke se yo mara. Ta chi de be rechi da tu ten juna li yuta ko chama song yo wara te che. Ta ten san de tra tra du wara to. Oh yeah, this one then thing I do should thing here would have done my to tip hang is in it and young with oh yeah, this should.
So, then next, in terms of the subjects or the outline here, is turning to abandoning attachment to women's bodies. And so here, this is in various topics of, in general, refuting that women's bodies are clean. And so here, we need to first begin by giving some context to this, because there are some who, upon hearing these particular teachings, think like, well, what is it? Why do Buddhists have it out for women? Or why are they disparaging women? And so we need to understand that first, this is taught for a particular purpose. The main audience here would have been monks, those who have taken ordination. And this kind of teaching is in order to counteract the kind of attachment that they might have had to women's bodies. In order to get rid of that attachment, it is taught that they are particularly unclean. But it's not as though this teaching is intended to imply that women are inherently impure and unclean, whereas men are not. But this is, again, contextual. If one were speaking to a group of nuns, we might be speaking about the uncleanliness of men's bodies, because the purpose would be to get rid of that kind of attachment toward men. Whatever is the object of one's attachment, teaching about their bodies as being unclean is in order to eliminate the kind of desire and attachment that we have towards that. So it isn't as though one or the other, men or women, is being singled out as being particularly unclean, but we should recognize that this is taught for a particular purpose. So when we are trying to get rid of that kind of attachment, I mean, maybe there are, say, monks who have been able to eliminate their attachment for lots of food and lots of bedding and clothing and so forth, but they still feel a kind of attachment towards women. Teaching about the uncleanliness of their bodies is really to reverse that. And this is something where it isn't as though one's own body isn't also unclean. You can turn that meditation toward one's own body and recognize the body that you have as being unclean as well. And so this is something that we need to understand quite clearly. As Chandrakirti has stated in his commentary to Aryadeva's 400 verses, this is dependent upon who the audience is. If you need to get rid of desire for women, that's why we talk about the uncleanliness of their bodies. If the object is to get rid of desire for men, one can take men's bodies as being unclean. Or if one is looking at one's own body in order to eliminate a kind of desire towards that, we have thinking about our own body as unclean. So one shouldn't see these kinds of teachings about the uncleanliness of the body as being particularly directed at women or somehow disparaging women, because the Buddha's teachings are very much about equality. When we think about the uncleanliness of the body, we are all equally unclean, right? So there are some who, in the traditions, like say in Hindu traditions, the context in which the Buddha would have been originally teaching, they looked at lower castes, those of a lower sort of rank in society, as being inherently unclean. And the Buddha's response to that was, oh no, we are all equally unclean, right? We are all, wherever we might be born, we are all sort of born from this same womb, right? Made of up of unclean ingredients or unclean materials. And so whereas some schools like the Hindus might, for example, look at certain castes like the Brahmins and the sort of ruling castes as being inherently clean, and then they look down upon the lower castes, like they don't even allow them to come into their house, or they think that their shadow is unclean and so forth. This kind of thinking was really challenged by the Buddha, who ordained those who were of a lower caste, who ordained women, and they were allowed into the monasteries or into the nunneries. And so whether of any type of body or person, the Buddha taught that we are all sort of equally unclean. It isn't as though we can look at in one group and say inherently those beings are unclean, or they have some sort of inherent negativity to them. but rather higher, lower castes, we are all sort of, none of us enjoys a special kind of purity. And so in that older model of society in which the Buddha originally taught, some were quite surprised, really maybe even shocked by the fact that the Buddha gave ordination to those of lower caste, gave ordination to women, those types of groups that might be seen as inherently unclean. Now, our modern society might be a little bit better. We don't necessarily have those kinds of judgments, but here we should be clear that even though this text, for example, gets very much into detail of the uncleanliness of women's bodies, the Buddha has taught that we are all equally unclean, and this is taught for a particular purpose in order to eliminate desire, not out of a kind of disparagement of a particular group.
Oh yeah. Tandima lo shandera. Tape meji le metawa ka batelia. Ka stawa ka batelia. No tambo ka doso. Oh yeah. What? Pemeji le 张话接着搞吧，张嘛应该得接着当搞吧些，等阵开始写个多，那说说的搞吧些，那没张光边这不写，等到忙不写个，他就那么帮这个不啦，他当不表面有六没张话接着搞吧，接着当呢是搞吧写的嘞，哦呀，表面六了吃啊，表面吃吧拍这呢是他表面里啊。 केबा येना रबजो येना करे केबा येने पेमेले छाबा ता पेमेने केबाले छाबा निगा योंगुरा छाबा फेजने ने पेमे दा केबा खायना चे सु जावा मिजावा रंग신 येना याको जावा दा येने येबा चे samlo ताने ने तेले छाबा यावरे सोरा पेमे सुजा semle cho सुजे 장마 야보지 뭐 남도 파다 제 대왕게 네 छाबा योंगुरे सोरा पेमे 료라 던도네 张么种菜有嘛意思？他本来留了呀，吃心多公给经验呢，那留了呀，张么买吧，没张外让心都是上不当呢。那个哦，这那让吃过些的没都上山的去，吃过别人到嘛都那样，吃过从的钱呢，嘛吃过这个人说了，现在没给吃个人说了，我这都那讲过了，但这本有入种，入到中华党是吧？鸡蛋那个现在这样讲给听得呢。 ane peme ina kebe lula me sang kome keba ina peme lula me sang kome ni ga she gyo da tanda cheba bo kalong yin ba chane ane peme lula me sang de she gyo da tin dog jo de peme ina kebe lula me sang ta ko ba ti chi ba de oh ya peme e chak ba pe chane peme la shen ja yong ya de ka re sin lu de tang man de ji shen ne 어 대왕게 르 메사웨랑 신전이 바데 삼루야고 코르마도네 아니 텔레하고 장진이 전에 대왕게 신자도 용거 어디서 와라 르 독자도 좀 메사와도 야보 삼루코나 언제 근데 신자 전부터 용 말에서 와라 그러면 수자 셈레죠 수데 장마다 봐 메사웨랑 신데 삼루마다네 장마다 시비치 삼루코도 용거 어디서 그러면 르라 돈도네 장마 좀 세요마 개바다 뱀메 르 가리나 tanda ko lulia sangma chi shibuchi yoba mare sigora o te kares na tandi one ma shevi chore dindu mara ya o de chulo shane de chire chaba pe jine so mi tawala tawa jimbe sembal tene chwa de shera ne pe me julo la tande sangma chi da tende ke yoba mare se o chi chi lo na ti to ya
So here, this is divided into various topics, beginning with in general, a refutation in general of holding women's bodies as being clean, and then getting into a refutation of the sort of holding individual parts as being clean, and then the result of meditating on uncleanliness like that. So again, here, whoever it might be that we feel attachment toward, we feel a kind of attachment holding to them as if they were sort of clean or pure, right? And if one wants to avert that attachment, to get rid of that kind of attachment or clinging to that, reduce that in some kind of a way, then you need to think about the uncleanliness of that body. So again, this was taught, the author of this is a monk, and therefore he is speaking to an audience of monks and speaking about the bodies of women. But we can take this as the bodies of men, whatever the attachment, the object of our attachment might be, because the author here was a straight male who is attached to women's bodies. That's the kind of object that is used, but we shouldn't take that as being exclusively so. We can put in whoever's body we might feel clinging or attachment to, and we cling to that. We feel that kind of attachment out of mistakenly holding that as being pure or the kind of source of pleasure. So here it says then in verse 148, most attachment to women comes from the belief that women's bodies are pure. But in actuality, there is no purity in a woman's body at all, or a man's body. So here, it isn't appropriate for us to feel that kind of attachment toward the form, the way that something looks, because when we feel attachment towards that body, it's as though we're holding it as though it's pure, as though it has some kind of pleasurable aspect. But in reality, there is no purity there, not in the slightest, and therefore it is not right to be attached to that.
This one.
Indeed.
Oh, yeah, that's the Maloshan. Yeah. Kabaleso. Oh, that. Oh, yeah. That did it. That. Oh, Mizanga Rashi, be Chakwa Mirikba Shego, Tambutala. Mizanga Rashi, Kepa the Pembe Kaina, Lulia, any Shancha Rigmarite, Cometanga Rashi, Church of the Chakwa Rigmarisi, but Kishik. Oh, Tambunesa. Oh, Penamazo, Liu Korangi. Talk about the Kangate Yongsa, Shiro Chirese, Kepa Pembe Kaina, Lulia. Zhangjin Doku Yuna, Shenzhen Doku Yuna, and then the summer Doku. That the Kadesna. Oh, Kane Kaju, that in a kind of Shine Kajuda, and the Kayanaga Soda Dangazu Katu the two Shirachi Gudwa, the Kaya Chutu to Rubata, so it's in the Soja Soba, or attended the Kaleti Makaya Soba, attended some Doku Resigora. Kane Kaju Rubata. Soja se soja kalia kaboro tinde gyo ngajo sotura ane soja misane inde se kale chashana ko sangmaji shibaji keyo mare se misane rashi timanda ane chi sota o tezu kanga kai kaju rebala soba tezu kebata bime kai na tinde re se gara o nane banda gunde chashana nabdulu ya ta chitene ma na chunjaya la soba tinde yongyo ra wa tezu shiwara Nani, na chunera. At the nation, Migni, Midu Chimega, Migdu China, Migu Yoya Yora, and Chimada, Michu Yoyada, Tende Yoyora, Tende Nurses, the Machi, Misawa Zayed over Kanga, Ombu Koto Kagana Matisigora. And then none of Tindis on many nurse. Or that individual attended Kanikajula Soba, Kendegnata, Mitawa, Kada, Nata, Meda, or Tazutangmane, Mitawa Soba, Tazuzaya and Nerdes. That gave a yena, Pemi Shenjando Hongayena, Titaware, Pemina, gave a Lula Shenjando Wina, Titawara, or Tichulamna.
So then there are various sort of topics here, beginning with refuting the sort of individual parts of the female body as being clean, or the individual parts of the male body as being clean. And so looking at how the body is solely the sort of uncleanliness, it isn't right to be attached to that. So beginning with verse 149, so we think about the various parts of a body that one might feel feel some sort of attachment to, like the mouth or the eyes and so forth. And here it then reads, her mouth is a vessel of impurity, with putrid saliva and gunk between her teeth. Her nose is a pot of snot, phlegm, and mucus, and her eyes contain eye slime and tears. So here, when we think about the body toward which we might feel a kind of clinging or attachment, maybe we see the mouth as beautiful. When we actually begin to think about what is within our mouth, I mean, we have to brush our teeth for a reason. The mouth is filled with putrid saliva and all this kind of gunk between the teeth. When we turn then to the nose is filled with all kind of mucus and snot and phlegm dripping out and so forth. And so too, the eyes as well contain these kinds of impurities, like eye slime and tears and so forth. So if we are looking to get rid of our attachment to a woman's body or get rid of our attachment to a man's body, contemplating in this way the impurity of all of those parts that comprise the things toward which we feel attachment is the way to get rid of that.
Oh yeah. Tandine ma lüge toası de kogwe nalol tsu samlatan sigara. Oh rabjun pomo karina shenja do kongge tende ne te samlatan guyara. Oh toye kone shangji da. Kogwe nalo ine ko chapsa da chokba da tende yora. Ne loa da chimbala soba chi tzu nangja kumala soba dhamme da kanga yora. O tzu kanga samlatan ra. Toye kone shangji da. Ne loa chimba soji nere se kogwa nalo te mitama mabuchi kantebe nere ma to te Simon chen shi o mare se mombe mombe momi lu me matawa tate ina ya ko mombe wang lu ti tangma de tinde chi shen ne ni shen ja yong go ra tunda ka se to ya nang lo te shang ji da ane loa da chimbala soba te zu kanga kawe nere se ora tende yimba metang samluti maton wange te lule ya ne chakwa chi wa de se ora tati rabshun keba yena pamere shenja yungu ne te kaya tanda te samta ore rabshun ma yena kebe lule ya tende samta ko re se ora ta ti chilam de.
So here then it turns to the kind of impurities within the main part of the body. So it reads in 150, her torso is a container of excrement. When we think about what's within our body, the things that we are going to expel, our excrement, our urine is within there. Holding urine, the lungs, liver, and such. The confused do not see that a woman or a man is such. Thus, they lust after his or her body. So here, when we think about another being, if we feel some kind of attachment towards them, it's usually out of seeing that as something pleasurable, something desirable. But in order to get rid of that kind of feeling, we don't see the ways in which they are impure or unclean. And so in order to eliminate that kind of desire, reverse that desire, is based upon seeing the uncleanliness of that. So if one is an ordained male who feels lust for female bodies, then thinking about the female body in this way removes that kind of attachment. And if you are an ordained female who lusts after men's bodies, thinking about men's bodies in this way gets rid of that kind of attachment.
Oh yeah. Ta chakwa miribe lule chakwa miribe peshe gdo. Oh pe kai she do sune. Mishin ga shi miza mishiban ga shi sura. Mizawe pumba pena nejere ji pumba che tinal mizawa ya kan sha yuna. Chilo de tangma che chi genje rab de da tarab de kyapche sha sha yuna sigora. O ti mizawa ne yimba ha konge che na ko ti chira sokwa jingri ma to tangma jingi marwa. Tele chakwa ki marwa dina shi ti chakwa ki merik be pesha gdo. Mishi kanshi se mishi ba kanshi mizawe pumba ken la cha pumba che nalo le mizawe lu shange che na teliane chilo ne pa tangmara se ken rabatin de teshe na tele chakpa tar sigora tangara ju lila soba tezo chilo kencha meto taya le soba kencha damir taya yora tende tabayina nalolia misame kande yene tele chakpa kiga marwa suro pumba rishina neche rishina tina shin jitenpa te soba ya mishibe wangi kiba yina pime yu da pime yina kiba yu le ya rabchung le soba te zu chakpa kiga ti yina ten dogu yona ten doye tandalya tina shi chakpa rigi marese nāng tsāngmā tāng chī wāngbī kō tsāngmā tī mī tsāngwā yōnggōng tī shachī rē tī yō tīndē sāng tāng wā rē sī tā yā tīndē wī rē tūne.
So then next comes an example to illustrate this. Here it says in 151, like unknowing persons who have become attached to an ornamented vessel filled with filth, ignorant and confused worldly beings are attached to women or men. So here, like this example, if you have some kind of a vessel, and either sort of inside the vessel or the vessel itself is something really putrid, disgusting, unclean, but yet you've ornamented it with all sorts of beautiful things on the outside. If you know that the contents, the kind of internal vessel itself is something quite unclean, quite gross, even though it is ornamented and adorned with all kinds of various things, you recognize it as being unclean. You don't feel a kind of attachment to that. So too, when it comes to others' bodies, out of not knowing, unknowing, they become attached to these bodies, which might be ornamented with various beautiful things, but really are in the nature of containing contents that are quite unclean. So it's not right. It's not logical to have that sort of attachment to something that is, in essence, unclean. So therefore, one should see the body of a woman as or a man as being like that.
Oh yeah. Tande re. Tā kiba tāng pime ki lū le chakpa yina. Ani chakde chachumbe kumbha rab tende top ku yu na. Ani shenda ne tāng longjo la soba chakpa meba che. Pime la soba tende li shencha do matoba tende yina. O te tene lū la soba tesu tanda kondu sheba na shi. Chakpa mirikbe na ne re te ora. Mitame rang shi chakpa mirikbe ne tele chaktebe na. Ani chakde chachumbe yurtuku ma re se. O di she ora. No. Pime ki lū tabu te shencha ndokbe shingone re te yo te. Tele ya kiba ta pime pensu chakpa te tende yina. Ani te chakde chachumbe yure ke shi yo ma re se. Chachumbe yule tsangma la ne lū longjo la soba tsangma la shencha te gora. O ti tundar she gora. Tene karsi do se na. Lū te ko irwa tā tāli sheba na shi nāngdā chi tsangma ne mitangwa dzakpa la soba o tende kyen jungsa ke mitangwa tsangma jungsa ke be ne lu be shi tsora de re se ora tela ya pa cha che dewe ne ne chakde drachomba jure ke ne shi yo ma re se te sonda dele chakpa rigi ma re se o te songdo keba da pembe kanyi ne te lu chakpa rigi ma re se ya te chila na
So the next, it basically says, how could one become an arhat or get to this state without attachment if one has a kind of attachment to women's bodies or to men's bodies? So here in verse 152, it reads, if the world is greatly attached to the putrid objects that are bodies, which should cause non-attachment, how then can it be led to non-attachment? So here it is something, the body as it is filled with all of these unclean things, actually inside and outside, both unclean, is really not the basis for attachment. And if one wants to attain the state of an arhat, well, a state without attachment, wherein one needs to give up attachment to all kinds of things, then why is it the case, like, how is it the case that one could proceed to such a state so long as you are still attached to something like the body of another? So here, whether it is the body of a man or a woman, so long as you remain sort of clinging, attached to that, how could one possibly attain the state of an arhat, get to a point wherein you are beyond such attachment?
Oh yeah. Tandi shiba de ma de chi shigdwa. Chidan ko keba pime kare lu na mezangwe shi imbalya, chakbe shi ma imba chilya ne, limbu tsugu samlu korma du ne, chakba tagiyo res ti shigdwa. Mo ti shigdwa. Chidar shangda chi shi la se, shangji la soba tezu sangba mezangwa nga zu chilo liba chini, te soba chigdwa. Ti jungsa ki zogo dabde sosi lu ne junggi wada. Shangda jiwa la soba, 중에 시리에서 오라 연주 내가래 연주 팔아 잡아다 집에는 박바다 된데는 예 쪽보다 지른교도 정말 이제 저도 박바도 차기라 그거랑 lö파 따네 지차기를 착배 시선 알아서 따나도 말인데 이나 그 lö파 따시 착배 시도가라 박바도 쓰기라 연주 팔아 잡아다 쪽바 사다 정말 이제 쪽바 요새들 같이라 착바 따르세 대신 상당 지시라 상진 중에 시 상지dim니다 어디 찍으라 당매 질로잖아 나로는 중국들 들게 메상 어디지 요새가 시리 들은 내가 착바리 말해서 대차 와 대차 연구 가르도 소스나 대차 연구 파남샤서 어디래 결에 박바남도 저도 대단 자와를 착바리 말해서 rabjung pomola soba ina da tele chakba chakte che kongege tasum be debu tom de batende ne tele chakba ring mare se te she do na tinde so
So then it sort of gives an example of how those who are sort of stupid or unwise are have a liking for these things that are really the cause of that which is unclean. So here it reads then in 153, just as filth-loving pigs are greatly attached to heaps of feces and urine, so too are filth-loving pigs that are desirous people greatly attached to heaps of feces and urine. So things like feces and urine, we all see as being unclean once they are out of the body, right? But yet it is strange that we don't see the body from which they come as being unclean. Now, pigs have a particular way of viewing things where they might look at something like feces and urine as being somehow clean. They impute that as something desirable and roll around in it. But yet we who are ignorant, although we see like feces and urine, if they are outside of the body, as being something unclean, we still feel a kind of attachment toward the bodies from which they come. So we are sort of like these kind of ignorant or filth-loving pigs ourselves, in that desirous people are greatly attached to the heaps of, as in the sources of feces and urine.
yeah then it is so what it is also
So our time is up for today, so we will stop there, leaving it then at verse 153 or just after.
yeah
Thank you again,
Thank you,
Lama,
Maxie.
very much
Yeah.
for your practical teachings.
thank you yeah
And Katrina, thank you so much for your beautiful translation, very clear. We'll see everyone next Monday at 8 a.m. Pacific. So we'll finish with some dedications.
May the spiritual teachers lead me on the sacred path, and the spiritual friends who practice it have long life. May I pacify completely all outer and inner hindrances. Grant such inspiration, I pray. May the lives of the venerable spiritual mentors be stable, and their virtuous actions spread in the 10 directions. May the light of Lobsang's teachings dispelling the darkness of the beings in the three worlds always increase. Iram Guru Ramana Dayami. Due to this merit, may we soon attain the awakened state Guru Buddha, that we may be able to liberate all sentient beings from their sufferings. May the precious Bodhi mind, not yet born, arise and grow. May the born have no decline, but increase forevermore.
진짜 제마제용게.
Oh, yeah, yeah. That's all.
Recording stop.